it is Jo, and I'm here today just to give you a short tutorial on sewing in your ends of your squares. I know these are triangles. I don't have a square to hand at the moment, and I'm actually filming this intro after filming the tutorial. I like to do things a little backwards. So these actually don't have any ends to sew in, and yes, this has a bit of white yarn, but all will be revealed later on in the video. It has been mentioned to me by a few members about sewing in ends. Some people aren't sure how to sew in their ends. Some people aren't sure whether they need to sew them in before they send. Some people just aren't sure what to do with them. So this is just to kind of give you a bit of a helping hand in how to do it. So often we see patterns and it tells us how to do every round, it tells us, or every row, it's all there explained to us, and then it might just say fasten off and weave in your ends or sew in your ends, and sometimes it might not even say that, but rarely do we get shown how to sew in our ends, how to deal with the ends. So I know when I first started crocheting, I didn't have a clue what to do, and one of my first big projects was a cushion made of granny squares, and I sewed my ends in quite badly, and I've got an old video on the Cal group YouTube that shows the disaster I had. My square cushion started to fall apart and looked like a dog had attacked it, which was rather sad. We still use it, but it just looks a bit sad now, and it's all because I didn't sew the ends in well enough, and thinking that I had sewn them in well enough, I then cut them and didn't leave much, and it just all sort of went a bit crazy, I guess you could say, with use, because the thing to remember is when we have our crochet is that for most things like blankets, cushions, it's going to get moved around, it's going to get stretched in different directions, and so when we sew our ends in, we want them to be kind of in there nice and securely, so that however it gets moved around, they're not going to pop out or anything. So that's basically it. So yeah, you might have seen some of my tutorials before if you've watched any of the YouTube for the 2018 Cal, and this year in Beyond the Cal, Sammy and I are doing those video tutorials for the various stitches and projects. If you don't know what groups I'm talking about, then let me know and I'll pop some new links up in our swap group. This video is just for you swap ladies. It's the very first video on this channel, actually, and so I'm hoping that I will get my channel running a bit more, and I'll hopefully do a bit more under my own name, which would be fun. Anyway, I'm going to stop waffling and let's have a look at how we can deal with our ends. Now everyone does it differently. Some people like to use a really small hook, some people like to use a needle. Personally, I prefer to use a needle, and they're quite often you'll see a big chunky needle like so being used, and that's great, that's fine, it works brilliantly. But quite often I use one of these, which still has quite a large eye. You can see that there, still has quite a large eye, but it has a pointy end. I don't know if my camera doesn't like focusing very much close up. It has a pointy end, and this is actually a chenille needle. You can get a pack of chenille needles for just £2 or £3 off of Amazon or from haberdashery shops. And they're great because they've got a big eye, but they've got a point, which means that you can break the yarn when you go through. I know that sounds a bit drastic, breaking the yarn, but you can kind of split the yarn when you go through. You can split those fibres, and then it's classed as burying in your ends, and it just makes those ends the yarn that you're sewing through, it just makes it a lot tighter and more secure because you're going through rather than kind of under a particular stitch. So that's why I like to use this, and then I like to sort of break through some of the strands of yarn and bury those ends in, and it just makes it a lot more secure. But any way does work. Okay, and the other thing is that depending on the style of your work, depends on how you might want to deal with your ends. So a closed in piece like this, so this is the solid granny triangle, and then I've got the basic granny triangle here. So these are two squares, if they're in square form, that we see a lot in the swap. So I thought they'd be good ones to show you. So when you've got a closed in piece like this, it's nice and simple. You can just sew your ends through and back and through. When you've got a piece like this, it's not quite so easy because there's not a straight piece to sew. There's individual stitches. Okay, so I'm going to show you that, the difference. Okay, so let me show you on this solid one first. So when I start making any piece, I like to leave a reasonable length of tail. Now, there was a time when I first started crocheting and we didn't have a lot of money, and I really wanted to start crocheting. But we didn't have a lot of money to buy lots of yarn. I probably had 2 different colours of yarn, and that was it. Everything I made was in those 2 colours. It was, I think I had brown and red, and they were the colours of our living room, and so everything was brown and red, and that was what I did. So my tails were not very long. I was being really frugal with my yarn, and so I understand that sometimes, you know, we don't have a lot of yarn. And so we don't want to leave lots of excess. We don't want to be cutting off and wasting a lot of yarn when we haven't got much to start with. So sewing in then was a lot more tricky. But I've since learned that if you can spare an extra couple of inches, it's worth it. So so I like to leave at least 6 inches really to sew in. And I always like to start in the centre. So whether you've made a magic ring or whether you've made doing a chain 4 and a slip stitch, it's all the same method. Apart from the magic ring, you need to make sure you've actually sewn it. So this was the magic ring. So I'll show you that. And I know some of you know all of this already, and if you do, then just skip ahead, ignore, switch off. So when it's the magic ring, it can easily pull undone. You can see a little pull there and it's making it loose. Okay, so what I like to do is go back a stitch and through, and that just helps secure that slightly, not a huge amount but slightly. And then I like to work my needle around this ring. Okay, so it would be a bigger ring if you've got a square, because you'd have 4 sides of stitches, but I like to sew around under the stitches of this circle, and I'm going one way like so. Oops, that's a bit tighter there where I just did that extra and I went back a stitch. Okay, so I like to go one way, and then what I like to do is go ahead. I'm hoping you can see this here. I like to go ahead a stitch but go under and to come back in the opposite direction. So instead of going that way and keep going round that way, I'm going to come towards me now, go under the next stitch, and that again helps to secure it. And pull it nice and tightly, and then again I just like to go round in this opposite direction. And even if it's not a magic ring, I still like to go around in one direction and then in the other. And the reason for doing that is that depending on what your things are going to be made into, if it's going to be made into something that's going to have a lot of use, for instance a blanket, then it's likely to be, I'm just going to use this piece, it's likely to get pulled and stretched. And if you are doing your stitches for your tails all in one direction and it gets pulled and stretched, then that tail could just easily start to pop out or come loose. Whereas if you're going in one direction and then in a different one and then back on yourself, then how it gets pulled or stretched, it's kind of trapped in there. If it's going like in a zigzag or an up, down, across motion, it's going to get caught in there and it can't just pop out easily. Okay, so I've done a few rounds of this, and then I'm just going to take that out, and then to hide the end, if I just cut it, I've still got some end there. I could cut it close as well, but that end could still show. So what I like to do is just give a slight pull on that. Now this is gathering up here, this work, but I like to give a slight pull, cut that as close as possible, and then pull it back out, and that end has just popped inside and hidden itself nicely. So that's all inside and nice and secure. And that works as well for if you're doing like soft toys or something, or anything a bit more 3D, that you can sort of pull it through and then pull it further than you need to, chop it off, and then stretch your item back out, and that end just sort of pops back in there and hides itself. So that's how I do the middle. Okay, now this end on this side, this is an easier way to do. Now there's a few options. You can just go across and under a few stitches, catching the back loops of those stitches, making sure that your needle isn't really showing much through the front. So if it was, that's okay like that. But if it was a bit like this, then you wouldn't want that, because you'd have a piece of yarn just going across the front of your work. So just pick up the back loops of your stitches. I like to go through several stitches all along, and then you've got the choice here. You can go around your corner, or you can come back. So what I like to do is then come back along, just skip a stitch. If you go back under that same stitch, it's going to come undone. So just like to go back along for a little way, do a few stitches, and because I'm using this pointy needle and it is sort of cutting through some of the strands of yarn, I don't have to do it as far as I would if I was using this chunky needle and going underneath, because that's going to stretch the stitches slightly and make it looser. Okay, so I've come back, and that is fairly secure, but not knowing what it would be used for, I'm just going to skip over the top of that stitch, and I'm just going to go back for a few more stitches. So now that's woven in, going back, forth and back, so 3 times, so that's not going to come out at all. So I'm just going to do the same and pull this a little, cut it off close, and then stretch that back out, and that end has popped inside and hidden itself, all gone, and there's nothing to show on the front, so sort of straight pieces going across. And there you go. That magic ring is nice and secure, it's not going to come undone, and that piece there, whichever way you stretch it, it's not going to come out. Okay, so there you go. That's how you can do that solid kind of piece of work. And the other way you can sew in, which don't have a piece to show you, is you can instead, you can go through the back of stitches along here. You can go down, along, and that also helps as well. Yeah, to go down, along. Okay, so that's how you can do the solid piece. Just make sure you're going sort of either around a long way, or if you had a really long tail, you could go up and around. And as long as you're going sort of around 2 sides, it will pretty much stay where it is. Okay, so the basic granny stitch, or any open stitch really, I've just been doing a tutorial for this triangle, so this is very open, so working the yarn in, sort of had to go through and under and through some stitches. So anything that's more open, such as the granny stitch, so again I like to start in the centre and work that centre as usual. I think this was, oh, it was another magic ring. Gosh, I don't do the magic ring very often. Not a great fan. but I would just do it the same way. Or the other thing you can do, instead of going back a stitch and round, go into the next stitch and through, and then leave a little loop and then go through and pull that just as you would when you're sewing and you want to fasten off. So do that to secure, and then I go back in the opposite direction, but I work under those stitches that are going round the ring. I work under there just as I did on the previous triangle. Okay, so just go round and under those stitches. And this is great when it's the same colour. You want to, oops, you want to try and sew your ends in on the same colour. So say when I've got a multicolour piece like this, that every end gets sewn into its own colour so that it doesn't show through. Just makes it look a lot neater. So then I'm just going to skip back over a stitch and start going around the other way, just for a round or two. If this was a square or I had 4 sections, I probably wouldn't do it as much because it's going to go around further anyway. But the triangle, I've only got 3 sections for it to secure in. So there we go. So then again, just give a slight tug, cut closely, and then stretch, and it pops back in. Okay, then we've got this one on the outside. So let me just thread my needle and let's have a look at this outside. So we don't have any stitches to immediately go under. Okay, there's not another row that we can go under easily like we did on this one. I had this row of single crochets that I was going under. This is just my double crochets and chains. So what I like to do for this is I like to go down vertically through the back bump or back loop of that stitch. Take my yarn down, make sure you're not pulling your work down too far, and then you've got the bottoms of those 3 stitches here. Okay, so then I like to go through the bottom there, and then like I said, if I just carried this across and went through the bottom here, you can see that there would just be this loose piece of yarn here, and if I was sewing these together to make a blanket, that could easily catch. Okay, so having that piece of yarn there won't work. So you can either then go down again through another stitch, through just the back part, don't go into the front, and then you can go along another bottom. Apologies for my camera keep going blurry. Okay, so you can go through those, and then again you can go down and then through, and that works. Or when you get to the bottom, you can then go through the back loops at the top of these stitches. Okay, go through the back loops and then go through the next set of stitches at the bottom, like so. And then again you can go through just some back loops, back bumps of these stitches. Okay, and across to the next set. But I would say don't just keep going in one line. I would then go down and to another set and work across. Okay, and then I would just work backwards slightly. I would go back through that stitch or those stitches and then up, and just work back through at least one set just to fully secure that tail. And there we go. And then again give a slight pull and chop, and then pull it back, and that end is gone. There we go. Nice and secure ends, nice and neat, and nothing's going to fall apart, and there's no tiny ends for someone to wonder what to do with. There you go. Okay, I've just attached a piece of white yarn here. I'm going to cut this off afterwards, just to show you what do you do if if the piece of yarn is too short. So we're going to imagine this is the same blue, and I'm taking it down. Actually, you can see how I'm doing the stitches here like this. Take it through, and then take it down, take it through, okay, and then get to this center stitch. Okay, and now to try and go through the next, oh, my yarn's going to try and pop out if I try too far to take my needle. It's going to pop out. So what you can do with a small piece is, instead of trying to stretch it as far as your stitch, so it means you have to go back, is turn your needle around and just hold on to that tiny end, and then you can go in reverse. Just mind if you've got a pointy needle, and take, oops, that's just come out completely, pop that back in. This is really handy if you've got a short piece of yarn. Use the eye and go backwards through with the eye, so you don't have to try and stretch your needle point as far. Go backwards through those stitches, push your needle through, and your yarn will come. You might need to just pull the yarn through your fingers, pull it through. It might pop out of the needle, so then just thread it again, and then you want to go back through to secure. So again, you're going to use the eye as if it was the point or the tip, and then so I'm going to skip over one and go backwards and through. And then I'm just giving it a slight encouragement, then rather than pushing it through and stretching the yarn, I'm just going to pull it through with my fingers and then take that out, and then you can cut that piece of yarn off, or you can even try and put it through once more backwards. So just go backwards again, just to show you can do it with quite short pieces. So just give that a pull through, and there you go. So go backwards with your needle if you need to, and that will work. Okay, so I hope this has helped. I hope this has made some of you a little less worried about sewing in the end, and that hopefully you'll be able to send off your squares with some lovely sewn in ends, and no sort of tiny short pieces or anything. So yeah, there you go. Any comments or questions, just ask me, and we'll try and help you. It's great to have you all as part of the group. It's a great group, and you're all a good bunch. So I hope you're all enjoying it. If there's ever a problem, do let me know, or Leslie, Margaret Leslie Spink, who is our moderator and great source of knowledge and help in the group. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful, and let us know. So see you soon. Bye.